Hey everybody, I have a great video for you today to help with your functional body movement, alignment, and fluidity. And we're going to be doing that by trying to give a better understanding of both the passive and active movements of our abdominal core and hips, as well as the actions of the muscles that control our knees and our ankles. I am doing this as a request from a viewer who wanted to learn a little bit more about the passive movements and what they should feel like, because I talk a lot about the active movements of the core, but not so much about what should the passive movements feel like. What do we need to focus on when we are walking or doing any other body movements while we're standing on two legs? So that's what we're going to get into today. If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Todd Martin, creator of the Walking Code. If you stick with me throughout the duration of this video, by the end, I expect that you're going to be feeling much more confident with your movement, much more fluid with your movement, and you're going to end up being able to move with lower impact and better alignment of your spine. So let's go ahead and get started. If at any point you are enjoying this video, which I hope you will be, go ahead and click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Over 90% of the people who watch my videos are not subscribed. So if you're serious about trying to move better with better alignment and lower impact on your joints, I suggest subscribing to the channel so you can make sure you see all of my content when it comes out. The more videos you watch, the more you're going to internalize this proper movement. As we do this video, I would like you to come along and do it with me so you can feel all the movements in your body and not just try to focus on learning with your mind what I'm talking about. I want you to feel this happening in real time. So we're going to stand up in what's called a bow stance. So my front leg is going to be facing forward, and my rear leg is going to have the foot angled out at about 45 degrees. Now I'm going to be standing in about a shoulder width stance with the feet relatively distant apart. But if you have any balance challenges, you can bring your feet closer together. The movements are going to end up being the same, just a little bit smaller. I'm going to take the wider stance so you'll be able to see the full weight shifts a little bit more clearly. So the first thing we're going to get started with is looking at the upper waist muscles and how they are controlling movement. I'm going to use my arms to reflect the motion of the upper waist. I'm going to shift forward to my left leg, back to my right leg, and the arms are going to move in this circular fashion because they're connected to the upper waist rotation. So as I move forward on the left, my upper waist muscles, the upper abs, are going to be active on the left, turning my spine around in a clockwise direction, forward and clockwise. The left arm is going to follow that movement. As I shift back, the right upper abs are going to turn forward and counterclockwise, and my right arm is going to follow that movement. My gaze is going to be relatively fixed forward. I'm looking at the camera, so I'm completely forward. If I wasn't looking at the camera, you would see a slight rotation of the head, but not too much. That's going to reflect the rotation from the spine. My head should stay aligned with my spine the whole time. So I'm going to shift forward and back. The active motion is this movement on the side where the arm is circling around. Left upper ab active, and then as I go back, the right upper abs are going to be active. As you activate one side, you need to deactivate the other side. And I think this is the question that the viewer had. What should you feel as you deactivate? And here's where you can do it quite easily. Because the activation of the upper abs flexes the spine forward, in order to keep vertical posture, as you activate one side, you have to deactivate the other side. if I'm here with my right side active and then I shift forward activating the left side and I don't deactivate the right, I'm simply going to start falling over very quickly because the flexion from both sides at the same time is going to cause the body to do that. So the only way to keep vertical posture as I activate the left side is to deactivate the right side. Think of it as a circle. We're going to fill one side of the circle and empty the other side. And then as I shift back, I'm going to fill the right side of the circle and empty the left side of the circle. Now let's look at the lower abs. The lower abs are going to help do two things. One is tuck the pelvis under on the side where they're active. So as I shift towards my left leg, I'm going to activate the lower abs on the left. That's going to tuck my pelvis on the left. And then as I shift back and to the right, the lower abs are going to tuck on the right. And just like with the upper abs, I need to deactivate the tuck on the left as I activate the tuck on the right. The other function that the lower abs are going to be doing is a rotational one, just like the upper abs, but the rotation from the lower abs is in the opposite direction from the upper abs. So my lower abs on the left are going to turn the spine, the lumbar spine. You can think of your belly button. They're going to turn towards that active side. So the lower abs on the left are going to turn my belly button to the left. Lower abs on the right are going to turn my belly button to the right. So just thinking about the lower abs as you shift forward and back, think of the belly button turning back into the right, forward to the left. I'm going to exaggerate the motion so you can see it, and you can exaggerate that motion so you can feel it a little bit better. But think of the turning and the tucking at the same time, turning and the tucking from the lower abs at the same time. Once you feel that, then you can stop the exaggeration and then just shift forward and back like I'm doing right here. So what should we feel from the lower abs as we're moving, active and passive? Well, I already talked about the active side, rotation of the belly button and tucking of the pelvis. The inactive side is simply going to release the movement. So as the belly button turns to the left, obviously it's not turning to the right at the same time. The tucking is a little bit harder to think about, but as you begin to tuck on the left, you have to get rid of the tuck on the right. But the easy thing you can think about is just keeping the pelvis in a neutral position, keeping the posture vertical. If I tuck on both sides at the same time, the pelvis is going to tuck back like this, and my body is going to fall forward from the pelvis. The pelvis is going to tip back while moving forward, and I'm going to fall over like that. So as long as you can keep the posture vertical and the pelvis vertical, you know you are deactivating correctly as you activate the other side. And we're just going to coordinate that with the upper waist. Now let's go down and look at our hip muscles. How are they functioning? When we're doing this activity, shifting forward and back, what we're powering with is flexion of the active hip. As I shift back to the right leg, I'm powering by flexing the left hip. As I shift forward to the left leg, I'm powering by flexing my right hip. So both shifts are powered by hip flexion, not hip extension. Hip flexion is coming from the muscles in the front of the hip that go from our upper thigh up into our lower abdomen. That's hip flexion. The glutes in the back are controlling hip extension. So if I wanted to move with hip extension, it would look something like that. That would be pushing with the hip versus pulling with the hip. If I'm shifting backwards, if I do the same upper and lower waist muscles action as I shift backwards, but I extend from my glute on the left, it's going to cause that action to happen because the hip is going to push the body away from the side that's active versus hip flexion tends to pull the body towards the side where it is active. So The upper and lower abs have a rotational aspect, but our hips also have a rotational aspect. Flexion tends to pull, extension tends to push. So flexing the right hip as we shift forward and flexing the left hip as we shift backward. Now, just like the abs, we only power actively with one side at a time. So I flex my right hip, that's active. My left hip is going to passively extend as I do that. As I shift backwards, I'm going to actively flex my left hip. The right hip is going to passively go into extension. I don't have to think about actively extending. Actively extending would be trying to push the leg down. I don't have to do that. It is purely a passive action as I do the motion. This is similar to how it works when you're walking. When you're walking, as you place the heel, you're going to be actively flexing the rear hip, and the forward hip is going to passively extend. So your glutes are going to fire passively on the side of the forward leg as the forefoot comes down to the flat position. Then as we swing through, we activate active flexion of the standing hip to swing through when we are walking. So just like the abs, only one side active at a time. We can't flex the active hip, like my left hip, and continue to flex the right hip at the same time. If you actively flex both hips at the same time, you will just immediately collapse. Nothing will be supporting the body. If you try to extend both hips at the same time, you're going to end up throwing yourself over backward, because with hip extension comes backward rotation of the pelvis. As I extend one hip, I can push myself forward like that, but if I extend both hips, I'm going to push myself over backward. So similar to the abdominal muscles, one side active at a time. Now let's break down some common problems with movement and posture that occur from using the abdominal core and the hips incorrectly. One of them is going to be pitching over like this. So a very forward hunched posture. That comes from not inactivating one side as you're moving. We have activation on both sides at the same time from the upper waist. Now I mentioned that's going to throw you over forward unless you compensate by deactivating the lower abs. So now I have no activity in the lower abs and I have both sides of the upper abs going, and it causes this to happen. Now, as people get much older and frail and lower abdominal activity or strength becomes weak, people start to walk like this because the lower abs are not active, and you have to be pitched forward if the lower abs aren't active, otherwise you would fall over. So we end up with this activity that you can see from some very elderly or frail people. No lower ab activity. The opposite problem is when you have both sides of the lower abs active, overactive. Like I said, it would pitch you forward and fall over this way unless you counterbalance by deactivating the forward motion from the upper part of the waist. And so now I've got over tucked pelvis, but no action up here to compensate. And this gives me the slouched posture. So now with the slouched posture also, I would be walking around with no waist rotation. I'm only using my hip action to do the movement. And since there's no waist rotation, you don't see any swinging of the arms. When we walk correctly, the swinging of the arms is created by the action of the upper and lower waist rotating around like that, actively. There's a third very common problem that people have with this core movement and posture, and that's the anterior pelvic tilt. The anterior pelvic tilt comes when we have no action in the lower abs, so the pelvis tilts forward, and we have the upper abs active to keep the balance here. Like I said, very elderly people might stand and walk like this, but most younger people, even if they have the same dysfunction, compensate by extending the glutes. So I'm now pushing from my glutes in the rear, and that's pushing my body up into what appears to be a vertical posture, but it's not really aligned. I have hyperextension of the upper back, and I have an exaggerated lordosis or curve in the lower back because I'm pushing myself up into this position instead of this aligned position. So that's an aligned spine. This is a misaligned spine because the glutes are active instead of the correct alignment from the waist muscles. When people stand with that sort of posture, which looks like this, we often have the knees locked out because the glutes are pushing back, exaggerated curvature in the lumbar spine, and this tension in the upper back. All of this misaligns the spine and can create chronic back pain. It also affects the way our feet hit the ground when we walk. If we walk properly with hip flexion, as I talk about in my videos, you're going to see this motion or moment where the heel hovers above the ground before it comes down in a controlled, soft placement. It's very low impact. But when people have an anterior pelvic tilt, the glutes are always pushing. They never release. They push on the right and then they push on the left. And what you're going to see is the heel goes directly into the ground without any of that heel hover. That is going to create a heavier impact on the heel and the knees and the hips when you land. But also what's happening when you walk that way is you do not have the lower abs shifting the spine over the standing leg. When we walk normally, we've got our lower abs turning the spine and aligning it with the knee that you're going to be standing on, and the knee aligned over the ankle. And so everything is lined up properly. When we have the anterior pelvic tilt, the lower abs aren't active, so they don't have the ability to shift the spine over to better alignment over the knee. So not only is your spine going to be out of alignment when you're walking with an anterior pelvic tilt, your hip and your knees are also going to be out of alignment. Now we're going to go just a little bit further for the rest of the video and figure out some coordination of the waist and hip muscles, moving beyond just this simple forward and back shift. What I want you to feel is as we shift forward to the left leg, we're flexing the right hip. I'm having activity or action on the left upper waist. What I want you to do is do that motion and then do a half step up with your rear foot. That's going to be controlled by taking the left upper waist and changing the action to the right upper waist. That is what's going to peel the foot off the ground. The hip is already flexing. The rear hip is flexing, but it doesn't lift the foot off the ground because the rotational energy is pushing back on that leg. When I remove that energy going backwards and change it to the other side, the foot is going to peel off the ground. It's going to create a half step. This is a very common motion in Tai Chi. After we shift and then we take a half step up, that half step is created by the rotation. And then we can shift back. And then we can shift into a single leg stance by taking the upper and lower waist both turning in the same direction. This keeps me balanced. Coordinating the upper and lower waist. Left upper waist, right upper waist. Shift back by taking the lower abs from the left to the right while powering from flexion of the left hip. So we can move around gracefully and fluidly with the core muscles. So the final thing we're going to do is take this into a walk. You're going to be using this counter rotation of the waist, lower abs and upper abs going in opposite directions, just like we did when we did this motion. So I have left upper and lower actives here as I shift forward, right upper and lower abs active as I shift backward. What I want you to do is take that motion. When you get to the forward leg, which is powered by flexion of the right hip, now what I want you to do is power from the left hip, and that's going to pull your body into the swing through phase of a step. So we're shifting around just like we did in the previous exercise. And when we get to the forward leg, take the power to the front of the left hip, and that's going to pull the body into this position. Then we rotate to bring the heel down, and then we activate the lower abs on the right, and then we power from the front of the right hip to step forward. So we have a lot of control of the movement. We're not pushing, we're not relying on momentum or gravity. We are relying purely on rotation from the core and the proper power from the hips. If we power from the wrong hip, you'll end up with problems like duck foot walking. When people duck foot walk, instead of powering from the standing leg hip to move forward, they power from the swing leg hip as they shift, and then they continue the power from the swing leg to shift or swing the leg forward. Then they power from the rear hip flexion and then continue that through the swing through. So if you have problems duck foot walking, you're going to notice that the swing through is being powered by the swing leg hip. What I want you to do to fix that is after you shift forward, take the motion from the rear leg hip and power from the forward leg hip. The core should be in the correct position already. So if I just power from the right leg, the correct leg, my left one, that hip is going to pull the body into alignment so the spine is now aligned with the direction the foot is facing. And then I can continue to walk in that direction. If I do it in this manner, just like we were doing the exercise, don't try to power the swing through by flexing the rear leg hip. Power the swing through with the forward leg hip. And that is going to pull everything into alignment, and that's going to be much more healthy for your joints, and you're going to be able to eliminate lots of different problems that cause pain. Not only pain in your legs, like your feet, your knees, and your hips, but pain in your lower back and pain in your shoulders that comes from incorrect core movement. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop me a comment and let me know what you think and what other videos or lessons you would like me to present in the future. And then I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Are you still here? Well, if you're still here, I'm going to give you a little bit of a bonus section where I'm going to talk briefly about the knees and the ankles. Now, I didn't get into this in the first part of the video because the knee and ankle actions are not going to be consciously or even subconsciously controlled by our mind, as the core muscles are. Our knee actions, whether extension or flexion, and our ankle actions, whether plantar flexion or dorsiflexion, are going to be completely reflexive. So they are going to be dependent on what we do in the core. When we are doing our exercise shifting back and forth, you don't have to think about the knees or the ankles. I don't have to think about the knee flexing on the right or the knee flexing on the left or the knee extending on the right while the knee flexes on the left. As long as I keep vertical posture, the knee action is going to happen automatically. Also, I don't need to think about the ankle plantar flexing on the left and dorsiflexing on the right, or vice versa as I shift in this direction. Your spinal reflexes will make your knees and ankles do what's necessary to keep the body vertical. Now, why is it so important that these movements are reflexive? It's because your knee and your ankle have such a wide degree of range of motion. Imagine a 90-degree or even more flexion of the knee. If we were to have to control that with our mind, imagine how fast you would fall over by flexing your knee even a little bit if it wasn't immediately counteracted by something going on in the other joints of the body. So we can't rely on our mind being quick enough, even subconsciously, to counterbalance all of the actions of knee flexion or extension or the ankle. Imagine if you were standing up and your ankle accidentally plantar flexed 10 degrees, you would fall over instantly. So the knee actions and the ankle actions are reflexive. If I do a certain movement of the core, the knees and ankles will act accordingly to keep the body vertical. Now, where this becomes very important is when we're walking, and you'll hear people talk about pushing off with the toes. If you try to push off with your toes when you're walking, there's no way you're going to be able to coordinate that with your body movement. The core is directing the movement. I can use my core to change direction, to maybe even walk backwards, but I'm doing that by changing the core movement, not by thinking about what the ankles are doing. I can't think about the ankles fast enough. So when you're walking, if you're trying to push off with the ankle, you're going to bring your mind to the wrong place. Your mind needs to be in the core, not down in your feet. So what's happening with the ankle, the rear ankle when we're walking is going to plantar flex when you bring the forward heel down. But it's not plantar flexing because I'm trying to push with the ankle. All I'm doing is trying to rotate the core, and the ankle plantar flexes on its own. If I try to time the plantar flexion of the ankle with the movement of the core, there's no way to make that work. So my point here is, when somebody says to push off with your toes, you shouldn't be trying to push off with your toes when you're walking. If you're on a skateboard, you can push with your toes all you want because you don't have to coordinate with what's going on up here. But the ankle is going to plantar flex only during this motion as I bring the heel down, and then it's going to stop. That action is occurring from the core. The ankle plantar flexes, and at this point it stops plantar flexing. It actually starts to pull forward. So that movement is very brief. From the time the swing through ends here and the heel hits the ground, that is the ankle plantar flexing. And then all of the motion from here is coming from the left side of the core and the knee, not coming from the ankle. So please don't try to push off with your toes, which means you have to push your ankle down. That's going to cause your body to not be coordinated well, and you may even strain your toe and cause a bunion. So keep the focus on your core, waist muscles and your hip muscles. Let the knee naturally flex as you move over it, and then as you power from the hip on this left side for the swing through, the knee will naturally extend. You don't have to think about it. It's controlled from the core. So I hope you like that little bonus. If you've gotten this far and haven't clicked the like button and subscribed to the channel, well, what can I say? I'll see you in the next one.